Welcome back. It's yet another ground up SCX24 chassis build, and this one's going to be a fun one, as you can see, and quite colorful. What's missing here is the body, and that's because I've flip-flopped this build 4 or 5 times on several components, the body being one of those. So I've got several options, so we'll get to that when we get to that. And the first thing I guess you'll notice is probably this beauty right here. So this is one of the items I flip-flopped. Initially I was planning the Nano Beast 2.0 for this build and a center mount to keep it very LCG, since I'm using, if you'll notice, the brass portal kit from Mofo RC right there in the bag. So those are gear reducted as well. So I was planning on this hot racing overdrive transmission, which I still think I can use, but I'm gonna gut it and put the guts into this nice anodized GPM case here, which will work nicely with the rest of the GPM aluminum and these no-name aluminum shocks. So that'll give me a nice little orange color scheme highlight there to go with this beautiful little motor. And then, like I said, I've got the portal kit here. So I've got plastic axles to build up gears. I've got brass links, tray, and a big diff cover. The Mofo RC Servo Beast, so the big one. So to power that, I've got a 7.4 BEC, got a nice metal horn. So that kind of rounds out the motor and transmission and axles. Got a Lizard Pro sitting there, receiver, some bearings, and then this side of the table, when we get to the links, wheels, and tires. So I'm going with a hybrid stretch. So I'm trying these Furitek brass high clearance links, which are deadbolt rear, C10 fronts. So a little bit longer than either one of those would be on their own. And then I've just got some Racing sliders, mainly for the sideboards in case I need to use those to mount to Crawl Innovations single stage soft and mediums to stuff into these Power Hobby. These are the Mudboss. So these are the mud terrain, same size as the Trail Warrior, just as sticky but a little bigger tread pattern. And then these beauties are WT Micro's super deep dish, black and chrome wheels here. These are new ones that he sent me, just beautiful. So I think that's gonna go well with these super fat tires, foams, get all that stuffed on those rims. So that's the chassis side of it, so we're gonna jump right in. All right, I figured we'd jump right into the axle assemblies. So I've got everything laid out I think we're gonna need for those. I want to take a quick look at this Mofo RC brass portal kit. It's really nice because it's basically symmetrical front and rear. You can see the portal box covers. So you get 4 inner covers and 4 outer covers. They're the same, front and rear, doesn't matter. You get brass knuckles and hardware included, and you get the long rear drive shafts, and then the front drive cups, and then the inner portal box gears out to the wheels are the same all the way around, and of course you get hardware. So that's what that kit comprises of. Pretty simple, self-explanatory. And the one thing that I did forget was my front inner dog bone to actually get out to these drive cups. So luckily I've got that in my parts box, so I'm gonna have to go grab that. But I think everything else, we are set to get this assembled. Okay, quick update on some axle progress. Got the rear one fully assembled and nice and smooth. So what I did with this is assembled the portal box for each side. You know, I had the axle shaft in on each side, the center gear and the bearings, but I didn't have the worm gear in. That way I could slide on each portal box, spin it, and it would just spin the shaft freely without the worm gear. Make sure that the portals, there was no binding, and those were very smooth and free spinning. So then assembling the worm gear with both O-rings, tightening down, there was quite a bit of resistance. So I tried with one O-ring, and then I ended up taking both O-rings off of that worm gear. And you can see there's just a little bit of play in and out. Probably less than that because I don't have a screw in this drive shaft. But, you know, like I say, no O-rings and spinning just fine. So you don't necessarily need the O-rings, they're just acting as shims. I believe that was an Injora worm gear set. So not surprisingly, there was some fitment issues, but that is all nice and smooth, so good to do this off the truck. Same with the front. Had an issue with one of these binding a little bit, tightened down to the knuckle. So I swapped it to the other side and it went on just fine, and then came back and had the same binding with the new portal box on this knuckle. Ended up just loosening both bottom screws, backing out the top, and kind of snugging them all down evenly, and you just snug them down. You don't really crank them tight, and that's given me nice smooth rotation. But I did have to disassemble this one, you know, off and on that knuckle 3 or 4 times. So again, do this stuff before you put it actually on the truck. That way you can test all the components and make sure they're working properly. That way if you have a problem, you can track it down pretty quickly. That really helped me with this, tracking it down really quickly to the O-rings being the problem. So you can see I've still got the majority of this front axle left, so I'm gonna keep moving forward. We'll see if this all goes smoothly. You can see I don't have O-rings laid out for this in preparation, so we'll be back in a second with hopefully a complete axle. All right, here we are with some progress. I've got the front axle now complete. Forgot to mention earlier, I did put this marine grease in the diffs and the portal boxes. It's all metal gears and there are no bearings in the portal boxes, so you definitely want some grease. So let's talk about this front axle assembly. So the portal boxes were turning smoothly separately. Installed the axles, worm gear, ended up using one O-ring in the worm gear, and that was all turning smoothly. Then the problem came when I assembled the knuckles onto the axle, and that's at full lock. My driver's side pin seems to be kind of popping out of the slot and getting slightly misaligned. It almost wants to kind of get ahead of it. Not too much, but it was enough to occasionally catch and bind, kind of click. So you can see there's a little bit of wear on that slot. What I did was, before I had the servo and tray on there, I slid a drill over this drive shaft, had the link hooked up so I could steer by hand, and I could feel any binding on the, you know, any feedback here. So I just worked that and kind of tried to break in that dog bone slot a little and soften that edge, basically. So I could feel it kind of clicking occasionally, but it's much better than it was. It may be that I'm gonna have to back the endpoints off, or turn the dual rate down, I guess, rather, to affect both sides so they don't turn as far. But you can see it's really nice and smooth as it should be. And then I get to a point and there's a little bit of resistance. Not a ton, but it's definitely not this. I wouldn't call it binding. It shouldn't be an issue for the brushless pancake motor, but there's not really gonna be any more I can do except kind of get it up and test it with it all installed. So I think for now, we're gonna move forward to the motor transmission assembly, and then we'll jump into the carbon fiber chassis. Okay, here we are with the parts and pieces for the next step. So we've got the 1700 kV Mofo RC Pancake, and this thing is just gorgeous. Very nice anodized orange. So the same diameter as the full-size Komodo, but none of the length. So very snub nose. So that ought to be very nice, and it's very lightweight as compared to the Komodo. And then it's got its own 3D printed motor mount. And we're gonna see if we can get these inners from this overdrive transmission out and fit them into this GPM case and get it all installed on this nice matching skid. So we'll be back in a second with some more progress. Here we are with the transmission case cracked open, and you can see the overdrive transmission. So you've got two sets of gears, top and bottom, and you've got a carrier bearing there in the middle on those bottom gears. The small top, just two of them are on that same shaft. It looks to be the same case, so these should just swap right in. We'll know soon enough. Well, I've got some bad news. The hot swap did not go as planned. You can see there the GPM case will not shut. So the outer case and the screw holes are the same as stock, but on the hot racing, the actual bearing retainers are deeper. That's what's different. It's deeper than these guys. So it allows for the double gear to be a little wider and the case to stay the same size. So all of these little gear pieces or bearing retainer pieces protrude a little more. So that's the difference. It's not an easy hot swap, so I'm gonna save that hot racing transmission for something else, since I definitely wanna use the orange on this build. So I've got some metal gears I can put in this for now, and I've got some overdrive differential gears on order, so I can always throw those in the front to get the overdrive I was looking for. So just something to know. The hot racing overdrive transmission case is proprietary to that hot racing transmission. All right, motor transmission is assembled, and that is gorgeous. Look at that, anodized orange. That was a good call. Nice and smooth. I did put a little marine grease in this transmission because I've got those NHX metal gears. And then you can see here, I've got a little bit of wiggle with my spur. So typically you want to like slip a piece of paper in there between them, but of course you can't in this, you just have to visually do it. But you do not want those too tight. So that looks good. I'm excited about that. Not too heavy an assembly. So you can see I've got some other parts here ready to move forward. I've got the frame out, the chassis, and when Nick at Mofo gave me this frame, thank you Nick, he gave me all of this, and then this was in there as well, which I think is just duplicates of everything here except for the hardware, and he threw in the servo lights. So I'm not 100% what comes with the kit. I think this is basically what you need for the chassis. This might get thrown in with it if you buy it from him, I'm not sure. Not necessary, but this is what we're going to use to move forward. Because this is going to mount the battery right here in this kind of LCG forward mount, I think I may end up having to flip the transmission to get that motor at the rear, get it out of the way, but we'll see as we start moving forward. You can see I've got the links out in preparation as well, and drive shafts. We're likely going to have to modify some drive shaft links if we flip this transmission, because the way the transmission sits in the tray is not symmetrical as far as where these drive shafts come out of the transmission. So when you flip it, you play with those links a little bit. So not a big deal. That's why I've got plastic drive shafts. We've got an assortment so we can cut those if needed or mix and match. So I think the next step is chassis assembly. All right, I got the motor mount and transmission in, and you can see I flipped my motor. I had it clocked and the wires were coming out right here, but they're basically interfering with the rail. They needed to be a little bit higher, so they weren't going to work. So I could have them coming out the top, and I thought I wasn't going to make them work coming out this way, but you can see it works. It's got a little metal arm basically that keeps the wires from touching the spinning can, which is super nice. So they are touching the motor mount, but that's fine. And then they are off the spur. They cannot touch it because of that little metal arm kind of holding them, and then the fact that they're pinched against the motor mount. So that all seems to work. That ESC tray mounts in either one of these pairs of holes. So in this configuration with the motor backwards, I can't use it. If I flipped it with the motor forward, I could use it. That's a possibility. I could potentially mount a battery maybe on the side tray, or mount the battery on the ESC tray and put the ESC on the back. And of course the weight right now is on that motor, so that would be the factor. Do I want that weight forward or back? And it may not be a big deal once I get all the weight on my front end axle and get the battery up here. There really won't be too much on the rear. So, you know, you've got some options here. I think I'm going to move forward with it in this configuration. And I was also looking at this, that screw head there below the spur gear. I may have to swap that to a pan head. That usually interferes with aftermarket links. And you can see I've got these hybrid Furitek links out. I really like their curve. They only have the etching on one side, and they are not symmetrical for the high clearance, similar to Enduro. They do give you hardware for the 4-link front, but that's it, just balls and O-rings. So I think I'm going to get those links put together and make sure those hang on the transmission with no problems, and then we'll look at maybe getting this battery tray in. Okay, Furitek links are assembled, and you can see I got a big bag of O-rings there. That's because I did not use any of their O-rings that they came with. They were so stiff and fairly small inner diameter that it took me about 5 minutes to get one link assembled, and my fingertips were just on fire from stretching the little O-rings around the flange edges. And that brings me to another point. These do not have the wider flange on one side, so you have to run O-rings on each side. So it doesn't give you the option to get more play in that joint by taking out an O-ring. So luckily I had a bunch of spare O-rings from prior, you know, Enduro shocks or links or something. So they happen to be a little bigger inner diameter, a little thinner, and much more flexible. So I swapped those in, and I'm very happy. They just went on super easy, and I've got a lot of movement in those joints. So something to know, if you're going to use these brass Furitek Hybrid links, you may want to provide your own O-rings to get a little more flexibility out of those joints and save you some pain. Look at that. That is what you want right there. So I did have to swap to a little silver button head screw there to get the clearance for that link, but everything is moving nice and freely now, so that's good news. Back with the front axle, so I wanted to do a quick follow-up here. I've pulled the portal box off of the knuckle on this driver's side, and then you can kind of pull that drive cup shaft out and disengage it from the dog bone, and lo and behold, the axle spins freely with no rotational resistance that I was getting earlier. So when the drive cup is disengaged from the dog bone and then the knuckle, it spins freely. So it's when they come together. So I don't know if the angle's slightly off, something about that connection. The portal box was spinning freely, so everything kind of works independently, but it's that joint. So we'll see if that wears in. Because it is brass, maybe it will kind of wear a little bit looser, so we will see, but not a huge deal. I'm just very picky about any kind of rotational resistance. I mean, it's not really binding, and that's not the dog bone pin coming out of the drive cup issue. That's a separate thing, I believe. I think that's more steering angle. But anyways, just a little update on that. I just couldn't move forward without giving it one more troubleshooting shot. So anyways, Well, here we are in pieces, and once I hooked this up to test it, I was getting a little chatter on the low end from the assembly here. So I had it all, of course, in the frame with the links, and it was just on the low end. I'll play a clip, but it was just really chattering away. So I thought it was the motor initially. So take a listen to it. But what it ended up being, I found, was the metal spur gear. So you can see I've got it removed here. So I had a typical mesh with a little bit of spur wiggle, like you should do, and it was giving me all that noise. So I played with the mesh on the metal one and ended up having to get such tight mesh. I wasn't really liking it, and I still had some noise from it. So of course, removing the spur gear, the motor was silent, so it wasn't the motor at all. The plastic spur gear, as you can see in here, is super silent. But what was causing that is the vibration from the actual motor at the low speed. Because when it's turning at a low speed, you can kind of feel it as it goes by each magnet. And so it's putting off a little vibration. And at a high speed, it does not do that because it's moving so fast. So, learn from my mistake. I should have tested the motor and transmission just like this. I could have troubleshot that real quick instead of having to disassemble everything. So, step by step, item by item, that's the way to go. If I wasn't making this video, hopefully I would have done that in the correct order. But anyways, just a little tip. We're going to leave the plastic spur gear in. We're going to leave the metal transmission gears in because it's no need to take those out. This thing is super silent now. So I'm going to get this put back together and we'll take a step forward. All right, look at that. That's where we left off. All back together. So we're moving on to drive shafts and shocks. So I've got the standard set here, short and medium. So you get deadbolt front and rear, and you get the male rear and front, and then you get the Jeep rear. So I've got the Jeep front here. So that gives me everything. And like I say, I flipped the transmission, so the links may be off, so I may have to snip some of these or switch some of these out. We'll see. And then you can see I've got these no-name orange shocks, and they feel pretty good. Swapped in the soft on a couple, and then I'm going to leave the kind of mediums on a couple. Quality control is a little off. Two of them had burrs. They're flatheads. So I guess where they sliced the flathead, there was a little burr on the edge. So two of them were binding inside, so I had to kind of knock that burr off. And then all of them were not threaded in the bottom very well. And one was kind of really hard to thread in. But anyways, getting these assembled. So gonna pull out the drive shafts and start hanging this stuff and see what we end up with. Here we are with the front end installed and functioning with that. So first off, I took out the female front JLU drive shaft, and I used a rear JLU drive shaft, and I cut that to be about 3 millimeters longer than the front, and that is just fine. And it's not as bad as I thought, actually, because I don't have more droop. If I did telescoping here or I did a flex blade, then this shorter male front drive shaft was falling out. So that's the adjustment there, very minor. I've got these shocks in the first hole up from the bottom hole, and that stops me right before this brace here, and it also stops the drive shaft right before it hits the battery tray, and you can see that upper link is getting really close as well, so that's about your max. It also stops right before the lower high clearance binds with that upper. You can see those are getting close. So without the shocks on, I was hitting that bind point and those were touching. Another adjustment was removing the inner O-ring there from those lower high clearance fronts. And that was because they were actually hitting and binding on the, I guess that's the upper link mount for that transmission skid. So you can see now they can slide over, so when you fully compress, there's no problem. So earlier I said you couldn't remove just one because there was no flange, but these are double captured, and even these single captured, if you remove the inner O-ring, I think you're still fine. So I was wrong. But the rest of these, you don't need to remove those thinner O-rings up and on there that are more flexible. They're just fine. But that was a metal on metal bind point, so had to be addressed. So the front is working about to its limits. The only thing I could do different was, add flex blades or telescoping shocks to give it more droop. But I think for now I'm gonna start here. And the rear, you can see no shocks, and I'm at a bind right here. So I'm gonna have to take probably a couple millimeters off of that female deadbolt rear to get more up travel. But it looks like my twist is fine. There's no binding. So we're almost there. And you can see this handy dandy little tool here. I had this in the box here from architecture school days. This is the little pipe cutter. So this works just perfectly, cutting these drive shafts uniformly and without too much pressure. What I was finding is when I was flush cutting these, it was actually compressing the drive shaft, so then when I would put the inner in there, I was getting binding. It was tight. So this is a nice, easy way to cut it uniformly, cleanly, and then your drive shaft goes right in and there's no binding. So I recommend one of these. So we're gonna get the rear buttoned up, and then I think we're gonna move forward to wheels, tires, and foams, get this thing rolling. Look at that, nice clean little cut. Couple millimeters off of there. Super smooth, super smooth. Of course, this is a front inner, so now I'm gonna get this guy swapped on there, but I highly recommend a little pipe cutter like this. Makes nice, clean little cuts. Okay, that little couple millimeter trim did the trick. So you can see the drive shaft there. And we get all the way up to the frame. So basically, as it comes together, not that we're going to get up to the frame, we may. I guess I could if I lay the shocks all the way down, but still fully engaged, and that is as far as it will allow itself to drop. Just naturally, it hangs on its own. So not that it'll have that kind of droop either, even with telescoping shocks. So I'm going to get these shocks on the back and see what kind of geometry we end up with. Okay, shocks are on, and I lied. I did get the axle all the way right up to the frame. Look at that. So that is full compression out of the shocks. So that is my full up travel right there. The diff misses the back brace, and then I went ahead, instead of using nuts to back these shocks up, went ahead and used a cross brace just to give a little more rigidity to the frame. But I couldn't be happier with that, and it looks like the geometry is going to be perfect with the front. As far as the link angles, it's going to be sitting about even. These mediums in the rear and the softs in the front. And one thing I forgot to mention on these shocks that I really like, they're asymmetrical ball studs. So they basically have a spacer built in to help keep the shock body off of the frame. You can see there on the front. Since these are leaned so extreme, they are kind of next to the frame there. They still, but they look like they clear. I mean, they're not binding at all. I might space them out with a little plastic spacer, but they're pretty straight. But overall, I'm very happy with how the rear end worked out. That feels very good. So I think we're ready to take a look at these wheels and tires. Okay, here we are at my favorite part of the build, the wheels and tires. So, got a lot out here on the table, much more than we're actually going to use, but I thought it'd be a good time to show off a few more of these WT Micro rims here. And I want to give a big shout out to Matt at WT Micros for sending me out 4 additional sets to try. He sent me a few new styles. I think I've purchased 4 from him, and then he sent me out some more. So one of the pairs, or the sets he sent me, is this super wide style with the black background. Really similar to the Island style or the Weld super wide. So that's going on. So these are the other super wide options. So of course, the Island style I used on my Blue Gladiator. This is the Weld style. It's kind of got the pattern around the rim. And then I'm not sure the name of this. It's the 5-star with kind of the serrated rim. But all of these are the super wide. And then for just a wide, you've seen these bronze. I'm using these on a current Gladiator build with kind of the satin ring. This new set, same bronze, but it's a chrome ring. These are just gorgeous wheels. And then this is kind of a little bit wider, but it's not the super wide. And I just love this spoke pattern. Just an awesome looking deep dish. So I've got an idea of something for these in the future. And then the last one here, these are currently on my C10 build that's in the works. These are the mil spec, kind of a military looking wheel with the wheel pattern. Again, these aren't super wide, they're just the wide. So some great options from WT Micros for resin wheels. So moving on from wheels, we've got scale hubs from RC 4-wheel drive. We've got the foams out here from Crawler Innovations, so we can kind of look at these as compared to the stock foams. So much shorter, much wider, much softer than these guys. But of course these will get taller as you bunch them up and fill in that tire. So we're gonna get those stuffed in there. And then I've got the Power Hobby Trail Boss, and I've got here on the left, this is the Trail Warrior. I guess these are the Mudboss, not Trail Boss. So same size, same compound stickiness, just a little chunkier tread pattern, and it doesn't have all the siping. It doesn't have the little fox or the transformer on there either. But these are incredible, so I'm assuming these are going to be just as good. One weird thing is like there's a gloss side, must be something to do with the mold, and there's a matte side of these tires. Just kind of strange. But we'll get these guys mounted up and see what they look like on these rims, and then get them on the chassis. Look at that beauty. Nice and wide. That looks awesome. So you can see I've got one mounted up, and I want to take a second. I ran into a little issue here. You can see how tight the top of the portal box is to that rim edge. So it's actually rubbing just barely, and you can see kind of where that hex sits. It sits behind the thread portion just a little bit. So I tried some different hexes that came out a little further, but they didn't leave me enough thread engagement for these little plastic scale hubs. So what I did was just put the hex on and then slip on a washer just to shim that wheel out just a hair, and that was perfect. So you can see now I've got clearance around the top edge. So I'm going to put those washers on all 4 corners, but something to look for when you're using portal boxes, check your backside wheel clearance, make sure you're not catching those or rubbing those. All right, all 4 wheels and tires mounted up. Got these scale hubs on there. Oh my gosh, this thing's just looking super sick. Got the shims behind the wheels so they can free spin. They're not binding on the portal boxes. They've got that little clearance, and check out that width right there. This thing is going to be a articulation machine. So speaking of that, let's take a look at that articulation. So this is about a exactly a 4 stock tire height, so that's a good good way to measure. So let's see what we get. So surely we get that, and we do. It looks like if we lift, we're going to pull that back tire off. So looks like the current setup, we're going to max at 4 tire. But I do have a possibility. I've got some double barrel conversions on order, so I may convert these rear shocks to double barrel to get a little more articulation. And you can see here the front sits kind of midway, so it's got travel in both directions. The rears sit all the way up, so they would allow more drop if I had the double barrels in the back, and they would allow a little more actual articulation and twist, but not that 4 tires is bad at all. Very happy with that. So we are getting very, very close to the end here. Not a lot left. We've got electronics, we've got the side trays to mount those on, and of course we've got a body to pick out and paint and mount up. And you can see here the addition. This is the Jeep GLU front mounting piece. So I just basically set it between the frame and ran a screw through the post on each side. So because it sits on that frame, it doesn't want to wiggle. So I'm going to probably back these up with nuts on the inside. This was just kind of a test idea. The nub probably gets snipped off and then magnets glued to this. And speaking of bodies, I couldn't go this far without at least grabbing something to preview. So this guy here is the now kind of unicorn FMS Atlas clear body for the 6x6. So they stopped making this, so these are very hard to find. But because it's for the 1/16, it's a little scaled up, but that's working just perfectly, it looks like, for the width of this thing. And like I said, I had 4 or 5 bodies, but now that I've got this mocked on here, I'm really, really leaning towards this. Man, that looks killer. And I like exposing the rear. I'm gonna get this nice carbon fiber frame, get a little shot of the motor from the back. So I think this is a real possibility right there. Oh my gosh. So that's definitely gonna be a little figuring out the mounting system, getting that fitted on there. Got the electronics, and I did get a little surprise in the mail. Got my 13T Injora overdrive gears. Yeah, these are 13T, so these ought to be closer to like 23% overdrive. So I'm gonna pop those in the front, get that overdrive that was intended. Then we've got the electronics, but again, I believe I've got a micro receiver that's being sent to me by a buddy that will replace this. So I think we're gonna hold on electronics, which is gonna hold us up on the BEC. So that's really all that's left. And of course the paint and body work, which there's gonna be a little bit, and potentially some LEDs. So I think for this first stage, I think we're gonna leave it here. And we've basically got a nice complete roller ready to be powered up. We've tested the motor. We haven't tested it all as it sits. I think I'm going to go ahead and get the overdrive in before we do that. But for the length of this one, I think we're going to stop stage 1, and we'll come back at stage 2, and we'll get this guy wrapped up, and you're going to see what kind of beast this thing turns into. So as always, I appreciate you coming along. Hope you learned something, hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for stage 2. Thanks for watching.